Hey everyone, it's Marvin. If you think the US needs better representation for minorities, especially during this election season, then you should check out The Future of Our Former Democracy, the chart-topping history podcast from More Equitable Democracy and Larj Media. Each week on The Future of Our Former Democracy, hosts George Cheung and Colin Cole dive into what our democracy could look like if we left behind our current winner-take-all model and embraced a fairer, more proportional system. If you need somewhere to start on this podcast, I recommend listening to the first episode where George discusses how his identity as a queer Asian American fueled his activism and commitment to social justice. Follow The Future of Our Former Democracy wherever you get your podcasts.
You're listening to Whoa! Potluck.
And welcome to Books and Boba, a book club and podcast featuring books by Asian and Asian American authors. My name is Marvin Yue.
And I'm Rira Yu.
And on this episode, we are discussing our November 2024 book club pick, Interior Chinatown by Charles Yu. And joining us this episode, I'm very excited to welcome two very special guests. They are the hosts of fellow Potluck podcast Saturday School, a podcast about Asian American film and pop culture history. Please join me in welcoming Ada Tseng and Brian Hu to the podcast.
Hello.
Hey.
Hello. Thanks for having us.
Of course, when Marvin picked this book, I was like, we need to get Ada and Brian here because they're probably like the most knowledgeable when it comes to Asian films and archetypes. And I was like really curious to hear your thoughts on the book. So very excited to talk to you guys.
No, I was excited because I hadn't read the book, but as soon as I started reading it, it was talking about stardom. And our current season is about stars of Asian American cinema. So I was like, whoever invited us, they had like a plan in
Very
mind.
serendipitous, yes. With our powers combined in Asian American film coverage and culture coverage, we will be the most qualified panel to discuss this book.
Yeah. As always, Books and Boba is supported in part by our listeners. So if you've been enjoying our podcast and want to become a bigger part of our book club, head on over to patreon.com/booksandboba, where you can gain access to the Books and Boba Discord server, where you can talk to fellow book club members in real time, as well as monthly bonus podcasts. So big thank you to all of our current patrons for your support of the Books and Boba podcast, and we hope to see more of you there in the future. I guess before we get into our discussion, just a quick spoiler warning for those of you listening. We will be discussing Interior Chinatown by Charles Yu in its entirety, including going deep into its plots and themes. So if you have not finished this book yet and don't want to be spoiled, this is your cue to hit pause on your podcast, finish the book, and then come back and listen to our discussion. Also, a quick caveat, because the TV adaptation of Interior Chinatown just dropped on Hulu earlier this month. I believe no one on this panel has seen the show yet. So our discussion will focus entirely on the book itself, although I'm sure the adaptation will come up in our discussion at some point. But yeah, let's get into it. Rira, why don't you kick off our discussion with the book jacket description of Interior Chinatown by Charles Yu?
All right. Willis Wu doesn't perceive himself as the protagonist in his own life. He's merely generic Asian man. Sometimes he gets to be background oriental making a weird face or even just Gray's son. But always he is relegated to a prop. Yet every day he leaves his tiny room in a Chinatown SRO and enters the Golden Palace restaurant, where Black and White, a procedural cop show, is in perpetual production. He's a bit player here too, but he dreams of being Kung Fu Guy, the most respected role that anyone who looks like him can attain. Or is it? After stumbling into the spotlight, Willis finds himself launched into a wider world than he's ever known, discovering not only the secret history of Chinatown, but the buried legacy of his own family. Dun dun dun.
Yeah. So Ada and Brian, as our guest hosts, I'd like to give you two the honor of kicking off our discussion by letting us know what your general thoughts are about Interior Chinatown.
You want me to go first? I have a very, very particular, specific lens when reading this book now. Because I think it's, a story about Asian American men in Hollywood, and kind of all the anxieties and insecurities and limitations of that role, and how the protagonist navigates it and hopefully learns from it. And I guess as writers who covered Asian American cinema, this is a topic that we're pretty familiar with. So much that at a magazine that Vera and I worked at together, Korean Journal and Audrey magazine, RIP, we did a series on hot Asian men.
Yeah.
That was basically all about this, right? This idea that, there were so many negative stereotypes about Asian men in the media. And this is before, this was before
Crazy Rich Asians, which came out in 2018.
Yeah, this is before Asians were in Marvel movies. This is before K-pop, made it pretty normalized for people to think Asian men were pretty good looking. But yes, I feel like I appreciated it for that, for sure. And also just sort of covering the industry in general and knowing how difficult it is for actors, all actors, and then even more for people of color and the specific challenges of Asian American men. I thought it was cool that they captured it, like it was a very specific story about that.
Yeah, I think Ada and I have been covering this world for a very long time, like interviewing a lot of actors, aspiring actors, people who have been in the industry for a while but have been sort of stuck running in place. So this is like topic-wise, this is very familiar to us. What I found, like what immediately grabbed me about this novel was the form, the fact that it was partly written in screenplay format, and so the way it's playing with what is a novel, and also the way it's playing with genre, how it evokes the police procedural, but also like some like immigrant melodrama is in there too. And it ends with like courtroom hysterics or courtroom histrionics, and how it seems very aware of all of these conventions, and these are all genres that have existed before Asian Americans, and it's wondering throughout like where's the role of Asian Americans within these genres. So yeah, the way the novel is able to indulge in the cliches and fun of the genres while questioning who belongs in them. Yeah, so yeah, to me it was really the form that gripped me about this novel.
Yeah, we actually read Charles's debut novel, How to Live Safely in a Science Fictional Universe, as one of our very earliest book club picks. And in that novel as well, he plays around a lot with form, with using stream of consciousness and second person narrative. So it was actually kind of cool for me to come back to his writing and be able to like kind of settle into a style. But I'm curious, Rira, I know that you're famously not a big fan of this sort of stream of consciousness prose. What did you think about the way the novel was written?
Okay, so yeah, I will admit that I did not like this book, but I will give it its credit. I actually did enjoy the screenplay format. Maybe I'm biased. I mean, my major was in screenwriting, so like seeing it in script form with Courier font, I was like, okay, I'm like very familiar with this. And there's something to be said about writing a novel in screenplay format, because like with scripts, you're not really in the character's mindset. You're seeing things from an exterior point of view. You're seeing it from a camera's point of view. And when you're reading a script, like all of the action, like sometimes it doesn't make it onto the film. So like everything is kind of like unsaid. So I thought it was a very interesting dynamic of like getting to know this character, but you're only getting the bare bones of them, and you're not able to really get into their head until like maybe like act 3, act 4, like towards like halfway into the book. And I did like the fact that our main character, Willis, he doesn't have any dialogue, so you finally see him get actual dialogue when he gets like a bigger role as like a special guest on the procedural show. So it was pretty clever seeing the structure and seeing how Willis becomes a main character through screenwriting tropes, and how Charles played with like form. Like in the beginning, you see notes about Willis in the margins, like literally in the margins of the book. And that's usually reserved for notes when you're doing screenwriting, like, oh, fade out, music cue here, blah, 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 blah. So I thought it was very playful, very clever, satirical, yes, but this book was not for me. It was not revolutionary, as this book came out in 2020 and it won the National Book Award. And I can see why it won the National Book Award. And I can see why it, people were saying that, oh, it's so original. But as someone who's covered Asian American media and film, it just seemed kind of, I don't know, surface level. I expected it to go a little bit deeper. And Charles Yu said in an interview, I think it was with his publisher, actually. But he mentioned that he started writing this book in 2013 when he was writing for Westworld, because he was a writer on Westworld. And his idea kind of came about with like him being like, oh, what if the NPCs, the non-playable characters in Westworld, like what do they do when the main story is happening? And I was like, I can see where the idea germinated. And it just, I don't know, it just seemed a little bit gimmicky to me. And I just wanted a more deep dive. But that was my initial reaction, I guess.
I mean, I can see where you're coming from because, the four of us, we've worked in and around Asian American entertainment and media for combined, we have decades of experience. So, we've seen all sorts of Asian American stories. So I'm sure we all immediately clocked the type of character Willis is, his personal struggles, and, the arc that he is about to embark on, because we've seen plenty of stories in our day exploring identity and confronting, the model minority myth. And it kind of does make sense that the story was conceptualized in the early aughts, because I feel like in 2024, the conversation has progressed. And so reading this book now kind of feels like, yeah, the themes feel a little dated, right? And I think that's something that a lot of our members who discuss this book with us on Discord also ran into, which is, Willis is a guy with a lot of, he has internalized the model minority as well as the emasculated, toxic Asian male mindset. And he really did feel like the type of guy who would be if not posting, at least browsing those Emerasian threads on Reddit about just how hard it is to be an Asian man. And a lot of our members were just really frustrated and annoyed with him throughout the novel.
But isn't that the point of the character, though, is he has built, because of his inferiority complex, he's putting everyone around him into categories, into roles. And the thing is, not everyone, we all play a role in society, and who we're with, we code switch, but we a person can't just be one role. We contain multitudes, right? So it just shows that he is a very shallow person, and I don't think he understands what I guess love is in the beginning of the book, when he before he becomes a father and all that. And I think that's the point, to, not like him and to consider him to be whiny. And as someone who read this book in 2024, where all these shows with Asian lead characters and also Post Everywhere, Everything All at Once, and Dee Dee, I'm okay, your idea of Asian male roles in Hollywood, it kind of seems antiquated. So I do wonder how this book would have read before 2018.
I don't know. I feel like this Asian obsession with Asian American demasculinization felt dated in 2013 when he was coming up with this as well. I mean, this is a similar response I had to the film adaptation of Shortcomings. And the graphic novel was written in the aughts. And I think at that time, sure, right, this was something Asian men and their obsession with white women or something, but they're to see it in a 2023 or 2022 movie is oh, are we still doing this?
We're still on this topic, yeah.
We're still on this topic, and because a lot has happened since then, and most especially this Amerasian. Is that what it's called? Not Amerasian. The
men's rights activists,
Asian,
but Asians,
yeah. The manosphere.
Right. But also like the way that it's like we've had this conversation around even like Wang Fu stuff, right? That even in the more innocent incarnations, we've all been able to tease this out as kind of problematic. And so to me, Interior Chinatown, that's what I found most tiresome about this novel. There is a love interest in the story who exists primarily to be pretty, and like that's also a joke within the book that, like there's some woman who exists just to be pretty, but she really has no function other than that, even in his own like self-realization. And even at the end, you're still like, oh, maybe they'll be together. And
I don't know. I was not cheering on for that couple. I felt real ick when he was starting to date her, and I'm like, "Girl, you could do so much better."
I know. What are you seeing in him?
She definitely had infinite patience for his bullshit. I would admit that for sure. I was definitely rooting for her when she decided to leave him in the middle of the book because he was just being a giant dumbass. But I guess the central character arc for Willis is essentially his journey to like self-actualization, right? He spends the book overcoming his internalized prejudices, decolonizing his mindset and coming to terms with like his existence in a rigged game. And, the book plays a lot in metaphor, right? Like this book on its surface is about Asians in Hollywood and the roles they're allowed to play, but it can also be seen as a story about Asians in American society, right? One of my favorite metaphors from the book was the idea of like Kung Fu man, the role of a Kung Fu guy as the pinnacle of what you can achieve as a model minority, right? Like you've reached a point where everyone knows who you are, people respect you, but they only respect you so far that you can do Kung Fu, right? You're still kind of like a side character in the story, a stereotype. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's the way that like our goal is to become doctors. And it's because like the society has carved that as a space that is acceptable for Asians. That is our Kung Fu guy.
Yeah, like even the archetype of Kung Fu guy, we don't even see that all that much anymore in cinema. I mean, I guess like
we do though. If you think about all like the big Asian American shows,
the Marvel film with Simu Liu,
films like Shang-Chi, films like Everything Ever All at Once, every upcoming film starring Kiki Kwang, they all involve some sort of kung fu, right? Even TV shows like Brother Son, they all involve some sort of kung fu, right? Like,
American-born Chinese.
Yeah,
oh, sure. That's right.
It's still very much like we can only be perceived if we are doing cool flips and kicks.
I think it's also a practical thing because even though it's changed, it's only kind of recently that I think the Asian American male actors have been getting these big roles. So kind of think about their careers decades before that, right? Like, I feel like a lot of them, maybe they naturally already studied martial arts growing up, but I feel like just like any skill, like I think this is true. Like, if you're going to be an Asian male in Hollywood, like 10 years ago or something like that, like it would be really smart to be able to know martial arts because you can get cast. Like back in the day, even the shows that didn't necessarily get a lot of seasons, like Marco Polo or something like that, and maybe just as critics, we might just be like, oh, I didn't really like that, but it employed so many actors, So I feel like all these shows, even if you didn't like them, they gave work to the actors who could do kung fu, you know what I mean, or martial arts and stuff.
And also, they're not just like a kung fu guy anymore. They actually have a name, and like the character actually has a character, like a hero's journey. So it is a little bit different. But I remember there was like a character. I think it was the black detective in the book. See, I'm like categorizing him because I don't remember his name. But he was like, doing well is part of the trap, and like working your way up a system that is built against you, like that is a trap. And I'm like, yeah, because it has already built a ceiling for how far Asian Americans can go, even if it's like, I don't know, like a leading male role, like there's still this expectation that you need to know martial arts, even though there's like a practical side to it.
Yeah, I mean, every single male character in this book knows kung fu, right? They bring it up in casual conversations like, hey, how's your kung fu these days? And, much like in real life, it's no coincidence that a lot of like the Asian American actors we know that are being cast, they all have some sort of like stunt or martial arts history, right?
It's definitely the case. Like when I look at resumes of actors, especially people who aren't like they haven't gotten their big break yet, like in their list of skills, that still pops up for men and women actually. But it's now it's like martial arts, but you also have to know how to sing and like ride
and
a
you
horse.
also have to know
Yeah.
some type of like Asian dialect, and it's like
Right,
what
right.
happens when you grew up in a household where you only spoke English and you kind of like lost that mother tongue, and it's like, yeah, you might be in a role where you have to speak some Asian language and you're going to completely butcher it, and then you're going to be butchered by the community because people are like, you.
Right.
Like, this is how I felt about. I didn't watch Lost, but I saw clips of Daniel Day Kim speaking in Korean, and I was so shocked because I'm like, wow, his Korean is so bad. Like, I could barely understand what he is saying, but I'm like,
I know, but that was so long ago. That was like 20 years ago, right? And it's sort of like, I don't know at that time. So if that happened now, there would be dialect coaches brought in, right? And then they would probably pay for somebody to train him. Like, I wonder how much training he actually got, because I don't think he was like a native speaker, right? And I don't know, maybe I'm just being nice. But I genuinely feel like if I was there and like somebody was like, you need to deliver this speech in Mandarin and no one's going to help you. and it's going to be broadcast to millions of people around the world who, not only the like the Americans are like the least of your worries, right? Because they won't understand anyway, but it's actually going to go to Korea, or for, it's going to go to the people who get actually like, you don't know. And, like, I can't imagine, like, he probably didn't have that much time to prepare for that.
Oh,
either.
yeah.
But nowadays, I think people understand that that's not something that actors or people in general can magically do. Like, I feel like it's all this like invisible pieces of the puzzle for actors to do their jobs, right? Like a lot of it, they didn't have, help for that.
yeah.
So.
I mean, the thing I did like about this book was how the building, the SRO building, had like each floor for like archetypes of Asian characters in cinema. It's like you have a floor of like the Asian gangsters, and then you have the floor for like the dragon ladies and like the like sexy hostesses and whatnot. And they all come to the realization at one point in their career and in their life that they're all interchangeable. It doesn't matter if you're Korean, Filipino, like everybody thinks you're going to be Chinese or whatever. And that is still kind of the case in cinema these days, because even though there's like more sensitivity training, I feel like if you are East Asian, like go for the East Asian roles. It doesn't matter if you're not Chinese. Like, I mean, like look at Fresh Off the Boat with Randall Park. Like he's not Taiwanese, but he was cast in that role because I don't know, like, I mean, he's a great actor and he definitely had like a dialect coach, but it just like makes me wonder like how progress is, and just like looking back at like, okay, well, it makes sense because like the pool of talent was so small. And now that the pool has gotten bigger, is this a decision that would have passed scrutiny today by critics?
Yeah, because I feel like I remember that. Vera, were you covering that when that came out?
I think
like,
so, yeah. And also, same thing with To All the Boys I Loved Before. Like people were, criticizing like, okay, well, the main actress is not, Wasian. She's not mixed race. So how does that translate into
Korean,
representation?
Right?
Yeah.
So this makes me wonder, like, how much more interesting this book would have been, because this book does not acknowledge non-Chinese Asians.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like this entire book, they talk about Asians in Asian America and the stereotypes against Asian Americans, but really like all Asians in this novel are Chinese. But they do acknowledge the diversity of different kinds of Chinese dialects. So like the Mandarin speakers, Cantonese speakers, they talk about how in the SROs there's like 5 different dialects going on at the same time. But how interesting this would have been if this like facade of Chinatown, this like Hollywood imagination of Chinatown was actually a very kind of multi-ethnic, a bunch of Asians all like performing a certain kind of China-ness. I feel like that's a missed opportunity.
Yeah. I mean, definitely this book, the setting plays on the fact that like, there's that one Chinatown episode every year of a police procedural, and it's like when everyone gets their chance to maybe get a speaking part, but then it's also very like, again, a flattened perception of what Chinatown is. And that's something I think this book does pretty well, which is push back against the notion of, let's say, Chinese America, Chinese people as a monolith, right? Like, I feel like some of the more stronger parts of the book are when the story starts exploring the backgrounds of Willis's parents, and we get some more insight as to how they came to the United States. And even there, like in their immigrant stories, it's not a monolith, right? People come for different reasons. Willis's mom comes from a working class background and, came to the United States on a boat, working low paying jobs and living with her sisters, while Willis's dad, his family was broken apart due to persecution from the White Terror period in Taiwanese history. But he arrives as a graduate student and by all accounts is on his way to getting his doctorate, but realizes that no one will hire him, right? And both of them end up at the same place, working at the Golden Palace in Chinatown. Again, illustrating the limitations of what Asians can achieve, right? And personally, it feels like the parts of the novel that focus on their story ended up leaving a stronger impression.
Yeah, but I think that's because it went deeper. It went into specificity. And, I felt like that specificity and genuineness is what made it shine. Whereas like the rest of the book, I'm like, okay, we are like doing this conversation and dance that we've heard over and over again about Asian male stereotypes in Hollywood. So it just felt really tired. And when the scenes with like the parents came and like their origin stories, I was like, okay, breath of fresh air. What did you guys think about like the parents' story?
I mean, I feel like it goes back to, I don't remember if we were talking about in the beginning or before we started recording, but this idea of like, who is this written for? And in some ways, it was kind of written for us, but it wasn't only written for us, right? Like at the end of the day, I don't think Charles Yu was trying to write a book just for Taiwanese Americans, you know what I mean? So like there's sort of a lot of explanation in order to catch people up who aren't familiar with all of these issues, right? So I don't know. I think I'm not super mad about that, but it's also like but I agree with you. I feel like when there were the parts where you got deeper in kind of Taiwan history, I was like, oh, this is why you write for the mainstream to sneak in this stuff, I was like, oh, hey, National Book Award winner that everyone around the world is reading.
A Trojan horse,
White Terror is, and that. And I was like, this is why our parents came to this country. I feel like it felt very like second generation too. Like, okay, we're gonna write the story and try to like tell our second generation struggles, but we're gonna get our parents' story in there too.
I mean, parts like that actually make me feel like this book wasn't exactly written for us, right? Like, there's a lot of like explaining this is the psyche of an Asian American male who feels like he is less than. Here's the history that you may not know about our communities. I think the reason why like this book became so lauded was because it's a book that you can like people will like, oh, I learned something, right? I don't think us in this like podcast necessarily learned a lot. At least the three of us that are Taiwanese American. Rira probably learned a little bit about our history here.
Even then, I'm just like, I feel like I already know this history. Like, I feel like we all share like the same like war trauma core like part of our colonial like history, and it's just like, okay, like I
actually found I totally agree that those scenes with the parents are a lot more emotionally genuine. They're grounded in a history and quote unquote reality. But maybe that's why I like those scenes least, because it came out of nowhere. Like the rest of the book is really embracing the fact, this like postmodern idea that there is no reality. that this is everything is a TV show. And we're all trapped in that, whether we are an actor or not. But in moments like that, it seems like, all right, we're now going to be a little bit more ethnographic. And I feel like that
I
is
think he was sneaking it in for his parents.
for his parents, or for white people. I think that is what we're talking about.
Oh, yeah.
Because that to me, that all felt like stuff I had read in Asian American literature before. Like that's more of the Amy Tan, like we're going to tell, I mean, that's a stretch. Maybe Amy Tan's a stretch, but like it's more of the telling the story of war-torn place we came from and how much we should feel bad about our existences because of what our parents sacrificed for us.
I know. I think I agree with you, but I think I'm still kind of like, people need to know. I think it's because I feel like there's frustration, but it's kind of like, I feel like there's levels of frustration, right? If we read it and we're kind of like, oh, this is like, it's kind of annoying or frustrating or whatever, because it's part of it's like, oh, like we know this already, like we've heard this millions of times, and then it's not for us. But it's also like the reality of knowing that the people who aren't us don't know this stuff, like, so it's kind of
they're
like,
also the people who are giving out the National Book Award. They're the people who
right.
are giving this book critical acclaim. So
And
really,
it's
this
Hulu.
book,
The executives at Hulu.
yeah, Hulu.
yeah.
I mean, the executives at Hulu were probably like, oh, we better do right with the Asian American community and, like be more mindful of what television we put on.
Yeah. And then, I don't know. And it's just kind of, I don't know, maybe I'm just like older, more jaded, but it's kind of like, that's just the realities of the system. So even though it's not like I love it, it's kind of like, does it hurt at the end of the day for this to be documented for the white people? You know what I mean? And for it to be, greenlit into a movie or into a TV series that maybe isn't for us either, but then we can like watch, people like Jimmy O Yang lead a series and watch Chris Pang, which I haven't watched this yet, but when I knew Chris Pang was in it and I didn't know who he played, and as soon as I was reading the book, I was like, oh, I know who because I know who he plays in this show. I don't know. So I feel like it's like this idea of like, if it's for us or not, it's kind of like, maybe it's not for us, but maybe that's fine. I don't know. I think I sort of still appreciated this idea of like, okay, it's documenting it in a different space. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I guess I'm not too
definitely.
I'm not too worried about who it's for, but what do we get out of it?
Yeah.
Right?
Do you feel
Yeah.
like we then I guess then there's the other side, right? Like, are we harmed by this? So I think I'm curious more for like Marvin and Brian, I guess, because I feel like I can still kind of read it and sort of be like, like, so
okay,
is it like annoying, or is it just
Do you
sort of
guys
like,
feel represented? Do you guys feel like
Do you feel
finally
like there's still
your
some
story
value
is
to
being
it, or-
told?
Because there is a part of me that's like, maybe it's still like, I'm sure people have felt like this, like you guys have felt like this in some point in your life. And the fact that you think is annoying is actually great, right? Like the fact that you don't still feel all of these pangs of masculinity.
I mean, okay, toxic masculinity and like internalized colonization, internalized patriarchy it's not a solved problem. It's still very much an issue within like all communities, right? So definitely I think I can speak for myself and Brian. I feel like we've risen above, I guess, in some ways.
Yeah, and I guess I should specify. I don't mean like you've definitely felt everything he's felt, but I just feel like general like insecurity. Maybe you left it while you were a preteen, but I also kind of like have some empathy for kind of this, or like, I don't know, but like basically the idea that it's not just any Asian American man, it's like Asian American men specifically in Hollywood. And maybe this is just my empathy for actors in general, having interviewed them and just knowing how like insane Hollywood is, where I'm just kind of like, I don't know how any actor stays sane and it's just sort of like the fact that like your entire job, like is determined by how you look, and people can go in and say all the things that are in this book that in the rest of the world would be completely inappropriate, but like that is actually something they can say to not give you a job and to make you feel bad about yourself. Like I feel some sympathy for that, where it's kind of like, yeah, like I hope, at least especially in California, when we're not as kind of
that is true. We are all like, living in Los Angeles, like, or like tangentially to entertainment. I'm like, what about the Asian American readers from like the Midwest and like New York and the South? Like, I'm really curious to hear you guys' thoughts, because you guys are a little bit more removed from the industry.
And I feel bad because I know that a lot of like, I know of quite a few people who have told me this is their favorite book, Asian Americans. And like, I think it goes back to like, not to harp on this question, who is this book for? But obviously, like us being like not only Asian Americans that have been, tangentially positioned with the entertainment industry, but also I want to say we're a little bit older too. Most of us, we were still young.
No, definitely not. But
yeah, also like growing up in spaces where we weren't the only Asian Americans, right?
Yeah. I feel like there's still a lot of people who needed these, like
healing your inner child pretty much.
It's like, it goes back to the whole idea of why representation matters. And I know that's like a very like tired phrase these days, because like we know representation matters, but like to see these stories or these ideas or these feelings be represented on the page or on the screen is still important to a lot of people who don't get that in their day-to-day, which is why like I feel like like personally, I didn't feel like this was like a transcendental book, but I do know that for some people, this is like what they've always wanted, right?
I feel that. The first chapter of this, they call it the act. I find the first act quite masterful, and I read it feeling like, wow, you are dissecting something here. In that first act, he breaks down these three character types: the kind of generic Asian man, and then this older, like an old Asian man, and then of course
Kung Fu master, right?
The Kung Fu master, and then the older brother, the guy who made it.
Oh, the older brother trope, like really.
The older brother trope, yeah. And all three of them are written as traps, and each one is dissected with such clarity of like how cruel a world is that we have these types. And I was totally with it. I love that first chapter. I mean, I didn't find him annoying until the love interest shows up. So I totally understand how some people would read this and find that, if not that they're seen, but that, wow, this book is willing to tackle issues that I've experienced before, or I've experienced in a different way, but
and explain it so concisely, right?
And in a way that's that's like with a scalpel.
Yeah.
Like this they're not sugarcoating it. I think because it can be a satire.
Right.
And also the way that there's something about this that feels sci-fi to me. That this is not based in reality. This is like some kind of like Black Mirror-y kind of reality.
Right.
Yeah.
And then to use that genre as a way to really get to the cruelties of the way that things have been set up for the Asian man.
Yeah. And I think for us, it was fun. Or at least for me, it was fun because I mentioned in the beginning that our season right now is about like stars in Asian American cinema. So, I mean, it's kind of all about that, kind of like thinking about like, who is the star, who gets to be the star, and what does stardom look like for, different people, and Asian Americans in particular. And I feel like that's what made it especially fun, kind of especially reading the first part of it, being like, oh yeah, like I love how he just kind of, puts it out there in that way. And it's I feel like it's valuable for that, right? If people aren't aware, you're like, yeah, just go read like the first chapter of this book,
That's like the excerpt that's being passed around to magazines and stuff. I did want to ask you guys about like how you felt when Phoebe had her own show, like the daughter. Like what were your thoughts on that?
It's Nihao Kailan, right?
Is it?
Yeah, it was Nihao Kailan.
It seems like Nihao Kailan to me. Like it's like they're speaking in some mix of English and Mandarin, but in some kind of like weird fantasy space that's sort of America, but sort of like ancient China.
Yeah. I think that was fun, just sort of juxtaposing his experience with her experience. And maybe that's the attempt to take it to the present, right? Because maybe we relate more to Phoebe's world.
Yeah, cause she's just like, why are you a kung fu guy? Why, like, kung fu dad? Like, that's it? And I'm like, oof, that must have burned as like a dad who worked so hard to get this job.
I see Phoebe's world as kind of dystopic too.
In what way?
It's like this strange, surreal, multicultural, like, hellscape to me.
Like the Bennington ads?
No, it's even it's even more about, like, we are wearing our multilingual diversity on our sleeve and we're giddily joking about it, like smiling through it all, but it all seems kind of,
it's still commercializing your identity, and it's like, okay, like, it's great that language and like our culture is more mainstream, but it still kind of feels ick because we are, you know, pretty much selling our identity to the mainstream. So,
and it's like laced with like Lucky Charms, like artificial sweeteners.
I think that's kind of like how Hollywood was, like, right before Crazy Rich Asians, and maybe now even still, right?
Where, still like that.
Where it's like, okay, we know we need to have like the non-white people there now, but it's not quite the non-white people writing it. So like, it's just like, oh, this is what white people think of like Asian people and Black people and Latino people, and so maybe that's the middle ground, and then we're still trying to get to this place where it's, you know, people writing their own stories, which, to give this book credit for, and the TV series, like, you know, he's the showrunner of it, you know, and it's his story, and it does seem like have a lot of kind of the Asian Americans in the background telling the story. So I don't know, like, I feel like for sure, I feel like when I started reading it, I forgot that it didn't come out till 2020. Like, because I was like, oh yeah, this came out, but I thought it came out a lot earlier. I must have like mistaken it with one of his previous books. So when I saw that it came out in 2020, I was like, that's really recent. Yeah, you know, because it doesn't feel like that, right? It doesn't feel like a 2020 book, but I feel like maybe that's just the nature of how long it takes to.
And how much has changed in the landscape as well. Yeah.
I mean, so the Phoebe chapter, for me, since I was reading it with the intention of like, okay, this is all metaphor, like I kind of saw it as like, you know, it's a gear change, right? So it's a gear change from like, I think maybe I'm in these feelings because I'm about to become a parent. I know Ada and Brian, you both are already parents, but like the gear change of like, okay, now I have to live. Now the scene has to shift. The show is not about me anymore and my like drive to become kung fu guy. The drive is now like, I need to teach this kid to be a good person and like to like raise them well. And that's kind of like, to me, that's what the shift was like, okay, the show has now become her show, not my show anymore.
Yeah, I like that part. Yeah, and if anything, I related to that part, you know, to sort of be like, okay, we're in these spaces where we were taught to chase something, right? We wanted success in a certain way, and we were taught success was a certain way. So I mean, it's probably kind of cheesy, but I feel like as parents, we kind of embrace the cheese more a little bit. But it's sort of like those scenes where he was like, why am I working so hard to be this bit part when I could be at home and I'm like this child's main character? Like, I'm so important in this world. You know what I mean?
Best supporting character for
Best
the dad.
supporting character.
That's all we can ever. That's all any dad can ever hope.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's also kind of funny that like he kind of becomes the straight man in Phoebe's show, right? Like a lot of his interactions just being bewildered by the craziness that's happening around this kid.
And also like he hasn't been in his child's life for 5 years. So it is extra disorienting. And I thought like it was like a fun canvas for this kind of story with like a dad being like, okay, let me connect to like my third generation daughter who doesn't really have to face the same well, she still faces discrimination, but it's like not as aggressive as the ones that like my father and myself have faced. So Yeah, I thought it was fun. If this was made, I mean, it is made into a TV show, but like if they ever get to the part where, he visits Phoebe, like I hope it's like animated, like they turned into cartoons or whatever. I want it to be surreal and wacky, but I don't know how much they changed the story for the TV show. I wanted to ask you guys, what did you guys think about the court scene where he is a defendant in his own missing Asian case, and we meet older brother who is the lawyer, and they go through this whole monologue about like Asian Americans trying to fit into a white and black society and all that. There was a lot in this monologue. I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
This might be my least favorite part of the book. I mean, just like I feel like this is a screenwriting thing where you shouldn't just explain everything with a dialogue. I mean, that's just tell, not show. But also, to what extent is this? Are they mocking monologues in courtroom scenes? Maybe.
Yeah.
Because the whole thing is like everybody's playing a type anyways, and at this point in the story, they become the heroic lawyer or something.
Yeah.
But I wasn't really feeling the sarcasm or irony in the scene. It really felt like, no, we're going to give you Asian American Studies 101 right now and tell you about railroad workers and why we've been impressed.
It did feel like that's where it was going, though. Maybe that's why I wasn't as judgmental about it. I feel like I was just like, yeah, this is where it's going.
Yeah, I feel like, it's the most, like, it was just so, what's the word, didactic? Is that the word? It's like it's trying to teach me something that I already know. And so, like, yeah, I agree with Brian. I think this is probably, like, my least favorite. Like, it wasn't badly written by any measure, but it was just, like, it felt like I was just being lectured throughout this entire chapter.
It literally was a lecture because it breaks the fourth wall.
And if I was someone who didn't know any of this stuff already, I would be, oh man, I never knew these things. But like, as someone who has, as people who have been entrenched in Asian American culture, again, combined decades of experience here, I guess it was cool to see it being executed in a way that was interesting. But I was like, okay, we've heard these speeches before. Let's get to the part where they break into Kung Fu, right?
I mean, it's interesting that, like, with us, it was like our least favorite part of the book. But what I read, like, reviews from other people, and they're like, wow, that scene was like so pivotal and like poignant, and it really like calcified the toxic masculinity and insecurity that Asian like a certain type of Asian men face, and like it articulated everything that I was like thinking about, and I'm like, I really did not like it. It really felt very it felt like I was getting sledgehammered with Asian American history and studies, but at the same time I'm like, okay, but having an Asian character say all of that to a white judge character, to like majority readers, I'm like, okay, there is power in that. There is an impact. It's just I'm not the audience for it, and it doesn't seem revolutionary.
I think though, like, I feel like partially for us, kind of going back to, our whole podcast is like going back to kind of like Asian American films in the 70s and 80s and tracing it through. And I feel like there's something really interesting about really just kind of scaling back and looking at it that way. And I think this book has a version of it, just sort of like thinking about his father's story versus his daughter's story. And I think part of it is actually like how do we tell our story to the mainstream, right? Like, how do we, we know how to tell our stories in our families, but like, if we're going to be in America and we're going to be like an integral part of America, how do we tell our story to people who don't know these stories, And I feel like, you could see in the book, but then also just, I feel like if you look at just Asian American cinema all the way through, it's sort of like in the very beginning, like, you can't tell a story, and then this first opportunity you have the story, you put everything in it. You know what I mean? You put everything in it. Like, everybody, with dumplings, we're making the dumplings. Like, we need, like every single like prop has to be like a Chinatown prop, and I feel like I can imagine it's like a hard balance to be like, what details do we put in there that are just authentic, and what details are we putting in there because they're like shiny, and what details are we putting in there because we feel like we might not have another opportunity to put it in there, right? So
Yeah, put in the Oscar speech, if we do
Yeah,
win
yeah, yeah.
an Oscar, that monologue would be the clip.
I know, yeah. So I feel like I have all those feelings about that even within this book, right? Just sort of like, is it too much? Is it not too much? And I guess it's just interesting. I think it's just sort of an interesting experience. Just Charles Yu as a writer in general, I think is like it feels like it's very specific to him too, as somebody who started as an author who, has his own style as a novelist. And then he was in the Hollywood sphere for a little bit too, and then coming back to it. I don't know. I
think he does a really good job with just providing the context that I think is more meaningful if you did not start with that context to begin with. And I mean, he also, like, his style is really interesting because he writes in a very experimental way, but at its core, it's still very poppy, right? There's a lot of quippy dialogue, lots of like satire, lots of humor, but also like told in the second person narrative that, like, I feel like, so I listened to half the book on audiobook, and I feel like I understood it more when I was listening to it than when I was actually reading it.
Interesting. Yeah. I started listening to it on audiobook, and then I had to turn it off. I don't know, like, it just kind of felt too cheesy for me. And I was just like, no, I need to like read the text. And I think reading the text really helped me understand, like, oh, the facade of Chinatown. Chinatown is not authentic at all. It's like an amusement park. And I don't know, like, reading it in text form, it became like more meta, even though I really don't like metafiction. It reminded me of like John Malkovich and like Scott Pilgrim. And I'm like, okay, like the absurdity, the boundary between reality and the performance that we play as Asian Americans in Hollywood. I'm like, that it seemed more blurring. So it was more interesting for me that way to consume the story rather than just like listen to it. But yeah, curious to hear our listeners' thoughts as well. Did you guys read it on audiobook?
Yeah, I read it as text. I've read it twice now. This is my second time reading it as a physical textbook. And reading it this time, I was thinking, how could this ever have been an audiobook? I still don't understand how this would have played out as an audiobook. I mean, obviously you can, because you could just have someone read it, but so much of it was like, how do they translate script in the margins? So much of it was like, which dialogue is in script format, which dialogue is in regular format. And it kind of matters how it bleeds, like, because it's referring to which quote unquote realities we may or may not be in. And for me, it's the font really, really matters.
Oh, yeah.
There's something about the Courier font. I mean, it's a reference to screenplays, of course, but Courier is like, it's not a warm font. It's a very cold font. There's something about, like, it's very factual. It's like the font that you use in an FBI file or something. And that kind of coldness kind of seeps in, so that when people are telling jokes, it's extra kind of unnerving. And of course, this idea of script, right? Like that this is the font of script, and everyone is sort of playing a part, and you're always very aware of that because of the font. So to me, that's what was really rich to me about the actual experience of reading the book, and just kind of that feeling. And I don't know how that translated in the audio version.
I will say the way that Charles plays with the screenplay form and writing in the margins is definitely lost in the audiobook production. I think personally, I feel like the parts of the book that were more stream of consciousness, second person narration, those were the ones that worked better for me in audiobook form. And especially if you're someone who struggles with stream of consciousness, I think having a voice that vocalizes the parts of the book that's telling you how Willis is feeling. Like, you're feeling this, you're seeing that, you think this, you recall that. I think those parts for me work better for the way I consume media in audio form. But definitely the parts of the book that, play with the visuals of the screenplay format work better on the page.
Yeah, it seemed more collaborative when it was doing like second person. It's like a director giving you directions. Be like, you think this, you're moving like that. And I'm like, I don't like it. It makes me feel uncomfortable. It's so aggressive, but that's the whole point. And it's like, I did not like this book, but I will give it its credit. Like, it made me feel something.
All this makes you wonder what the TV show is going to be like. And this is maybe one reason I've resisted the TV show, because I don't actually want to hear anybody say this dialogue out loud. And also, I did see the trailer for the show, and the trailer felt like a Chinatown episode. Like there's a way in which like the trailer made it seem like it was actually indulging in all the things it's supposed to be critiquing. Of course, it's just a trailer. This may be the hook. It may be sort of a meta trailer in that sense. And
the hook for all the white people.
For all the white people who just want to see kung fu. Oh, Asians
gotta get the viewership.
Yeah, they better do some kung fu. And that the trailer is that. And there's nothing in the trailer that makes you think that this is actually a self-parody. So I'm curious how they would play that out, execute it. But I'm also not curious enough to jump at watching it right now.
Yeah.
You don't know. It could be a trap. You know how like this book, like it lures you in and then it's like, okay, bam, the parents' immigrant story. It's like maybe it like lulls you into security of like, I've seen this before. This is about like kung fu and like all the stuff that I've seen in Asian American cinema before. But I don't know. I am curious.
I'm going to be honest. Like, I'm like you guys. I'm not looking forward to the big speeches during the courtroom scene, but I am looking forward to lawyer Chris Pang doing kung fu.
right. Yeah. I think that's what I haven't. I'm gonna blame having kids to not jumping on watching, because it's just hard for me to start any series. But I am curious about it, and I think that's, I don't know, but it's probably because who's in it. I think it's cool that Jimmy O Yang plays the lead, and I'm sort of curious what he does with that. I love Ronnie Chang, so I watch whatever he does.
Everyone's dad, Taima, is playing the dad. Perfect casting.
Yeah. And Chris Pang for sure. I think I'm just curious. I don't know. If anything, I guess it's like a nice thing that there's enough Asian American actors that I'm like, I know bodies. That person, and I'm curious about what his role is, and I don't know. At the very least, even if it's like somebody, even if it's like somebody delivering like a really, really bad speech, it'll still be like interesting that they made them do that.
I do hope they address I think the biggest elephant in the room for the adaptation is how they address the female characters, right? Because otherwise it's going to be a very dude-focused show, and I don't know if that plays in 2024.
Yeah, I wonder if they update it a little bit.
That's kind of how I felt about Crazy Rich Asians. Like reading the book, I'm like, damn, this is like, you can tell that a man wrote this. And then the movie, thank God Adele was one of the writers, but I'm just like, okay. Well, because this is a TV show, they probably have a woman or two in there, hopefully, with the screenwriting process. So hopefully our character, our Karen, gets more fleshed out. But yeah, we've been talking for a while, so I think we should wrap it up.
Yeah, I think we can call it. Thank you for listening to our discussion of our November 2024 book club pick, Interior Chinatown by Charles Yu. Ada, Brian, thank you so much for joining us to discuss this book. And for those of you who have listened to us to this point, let us know your thoughts about either the book, our discussion, or the Hulu live action adaptation if you've watched it. You can let us know either on our Goodreads forums or if you are a Patreon supporter on our Discord server. We would love to hear your opinions and your feedback. And if you enjoyed Ada and Brian on our podcast, don't forget to check out their podcast, Saturday School, which is also part of our Potluck Podcast Collective. Do you guys want to let our listeners know a little bit about what your podcast is all about?
We cover Asian American pop culture. We do it in semesters. Brian is an actual professor. I'm a pretend professor. And each season we have a topic, and this season is Asian Americans. Stars of Asian American cinema, where we're basically kind of looking at the folks that we considered our stars, right? So it's, there's the Hollywood star, but who were our stars for those of us who follow like Asian American indie film and the Asian American film festival scene. So I feel like it was a lot of people that probably really identified with the characters in Interior Chinatown, unfortunately, right? And it's like, even though it feels dated to us, I feel like it was a real thing, you know, for a lot of people, and it felt bad. And if you didn't turn out toxic, then we appreciate it.
Well, I think like our season is sort of the other way. I mean, if Charles, you witnessed a Hollywood where all these Asian men who are trying to make it in the industry just couldn't do anything and they were stuck. What we're exploring is all these people, all these actors who then went on the side and made independent films,
right?
Where they could be the stars of their own independent films.
Yeah.
So like we are the other kind of alternate universe to this.
Where they could just be like the romantic lead and just fall in love and not worry so much about their kung fu skills. Yeah, I don't think we have any martial arts films in our...
No, I don't think so.
I feel like that should have been a bonus chapter in Interior Chinatown, which is in the Asian man, right?
Yeah, like the older brother. Yeah. The older brother who like became the lawyer, like he should have been like the guy who directed like Better Luck Tomorrow or some version of it.
Right.
And he comes out just fine.
Yeah. He's gonna be all right.
It's like, what are white people?
He comes back to the China episode. We're like, why are you back?
I mean, I do feel like looking back, I always feel lucky in that way, because I feel like reading something like Interior Chinatown, like I like don't really identify with it that much, you know what I mean? But I don't want to like say that people don't. I know this is a thing, right? So it's a lot of people identify with it, and a lot of people need it. So like, and I like the fact that it's documenting this, you know? So like it doesn't feel 100% for me, but it's not for me, you know? So
yeah,
I don't know. Yeah, I appreciate you giving me the excuse to read it, because I hadn't read it yet. 2020, man. In the midst of pandemic and virtual school.
In the like right after like the anti-Asian like attacks because of COVID.
I know.
Really interesting at like as to like if Charles wrote this like during 2020, how different.
Well, it came out 2020, so he wrote it before.
Yeah, but
right?
he wrote it before, so it's like.
And I always sort of feel like if we watch Asian American stuff and we feel like it's dated, it's a good thing. Right?
It's a good thing.
Like,
yeah,
it's good that we feel like it's dated. We want our kids to feel like everything we did is dated. You know what I mean? Because that's the part. I feel like when we go back to like Asian American films that are older, like it's not like when it feels dated, it's good. When it feels like, oh shoot, this could have just happened yesterday.
Yeah, no, kids are gonna be like, you guys did an Asian American podcast? Oh, that's so
lame. Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to demean all of our work.
No, it's totally fine. I mean, I keep thinking like, oh, there'll be a day when we run out of Asian books to talk about on this show, right? But no, I keep being proven wrong, so that's great. Well, for our listeners who want to participate in our December book club discussion, we are reading Kim Ji-young, born 1982, written by Cho Nam-ju and translated by Jamie Chang. This is a great pick, in my opinion. I picked it because we read into like the perspective of like a Asian American male in Hollywood and a lot of like toxic masculinity stuff. So we are now going to the opposite direction of all the Korean women who are facing misogyny in their societies. So it's gonna be an interesting read. It's less than 200 pages, so it should be a perfect length for those of you guys who are busy with the holidays.
Yeah, looking forward to checking that book out with all of you. And with that, that'll do it for this episode of Books and Boba. Thank you once again to Brian and Ada for joining us. We'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Books and Boba. This podcast was hosted by Marvin Yue and Rira Yu and edited and produced by Marvin Yue. Follow the book club on Twitter and Instagram by going to @BooksandBoba and engage with us on Goodreads on our Goodreads group. You can also check out past episodes of the podcast by going to booksandboba.com and by subscribing to us on your favorite podcast app. Don't forget, you can support Books and Boba and Asian American authors by purchasing books at our bookshop.org account. Check out the link in our show notes and also at booksandboba.com. Books and Boba is a proud member of the Potluck Podcast Collective, a collective of Asian American hosted podcasts featuring unique voices and stories from the Asian diaspora. Learn more about the collective and check out our fellow Potluck shows by visiting the website podcastpotluck.com. Thanks for listening.
Hey, Candace. We are so excited to have you join me and Kathy for a brand new season of the Korean Drama Podcast, the podcast about watching Korean dramas by people who don't watch Korean dramas.
I'm so excited to join the podcast, but where's Kathy? She said she'd meet us here.
Candace, I'm right here.
Why is Kathy's voice coming from this chicken meatball?
So, funny story. I was so busy watching Korean dramas on my phone to prepare for this podcast that I accidentally walked into a mysterious machine and got turned into food. And, excuse me, Kim, I'm obviously a chicken nugget.
Agree to disagree.
Well, that's a weird coincidence because for our 5th season of the Korean Drama Podcast, we're watching the comedy sci-fi series Chicken Nugget.
Join us each week as we discuss the highs and lows of Chicken Nugget episode by episode.
So grab a snack, maybe not chicken nuggets, and follow us on your favorite podcast app, part of the Potluck Podcast Collective.
You're totally going to eat me, aren't you?